Max sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the soft glow of the digital clock on the nightstand. 2:17 nachts. Lucy lay beside him, her breathing steady, her body curled away, as if even in sleep. She wanted distance. A year ago, she would have been tangled in his arms, her fingers tracing lazy patterns across his skin, whispering her desires into the quiet of the night. But now, the bed felt like an empty chasm. The signs had been creeping in like shadows at dusk. Her lingering perfume when she came home late, the careful way she locked her phone, the way she kissed him out of obligation rather than passion. Desire had turned to duty, intimacy to indifference. Their once electric nights had faded into a predictable routine of pecks on the cheek and half-hearted goodnights. Max had always prided himself on being a man who provided, a man who protected. But lately, it felt like he was merely a fixture in her life, a background character in her world of secrets. He exhaled slowly, a weight settling in his chest. Something had shifted between them, something unspoken, and if he didn't act soon, he feared he would lose her completely. The tension in their home had become a silent intruder, lurking in every shadowed corner, whispering between the spaces of their conversations. Max could feel it like a storm brewing, heavy and oppressive, but Lucy acted as if nothing had changed. She still moved through their home with practiced grace, still greeted him with a polite kiss on the cheek, still slipped under the covers at night. But there was an absence in her touch, a hesitation in her voice. It wasn't just the way she spoke to him, but the way she carried herself. The once playful glances she used to throw his way were now reserved for someone else. He saw it in the way her eyes shimmered when she checked her phone, the way her lips curled ever so slightly when she read certain messages. A secret world existed within her, one that he was no longer a part of. Tonight, as she stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the thin straps of her dress, he watched her. The fabric clung to her curves, the scent of expensive perfume lingering in the air, a scent he hadn't smelled on her before. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, his voice calm but firm. "Where are you going?" Lucy barely glanced at him, her fingers tracing the delicate silver chain around her neck. "Out with the girls," she said smoothly, her reflection betraying nothing. Max said nothing, only nodding. But inside, something twisted. He knew she was lying. And tonight, he was going to find out the truth. The night air was thick with the scent of the city, cigarette smoke, damp pavement, the faint, lingering perfume of passing strangers. Max sat in his car, parked a block away from the restaurant Lucy had named as her alibi. But she wasn't here. His fingers tightened around the steering wheel as he watched through the windshield, waiting, scanning the faces moving in and out of the entrance. No sign of her. No trace of laughter-filled reunions with her so-called girlfriends. Instead, he followed a hunch, a sickening instinct gnawing at the edges of his mind. His breath slowed as he drove through the city, past familiar streets, before finally arriving at a quiet boutique hotel nestled between towering office buildings. And then he saw her, Lucy, stepping out of a black sedan, her hand casually adjusting the hem of her dress. But she wasn't alone. A man followed, tall, well-dressed, confident in the way he guided her inside with a hand at the small of her back. Max's stomach clenched, his vision narrowing. It wasn't the first time she had lied. But this was undeniable. He gripped the steering wheel, his pulse hammering against his skin. 1,000 thoughts clawed at his mind. Rage, disbelief, the crushing weight of betrayal. He had given her everything. Yet here she was, walking into another man's arms, as if their marriage was nothing more than a distant memory. Tonight wasn't the night for confrontation. No, Max needed more than anger. He needed proof. The morning light poured through the blinds, casting golden slats across the bedroom as Max sat at the edge of the bed, his mind a battlefield of rage and clarity. The night before had been confirmation, not just of Lucy's betrayal, but of how thoroughly she had underestimated him. She thought he would stay oblivious, that he would continue believing in the mirage of their marriage. But she had miscalculated. His fingers tightened around his phone as he scrolled through the private investigator's latest messages. Photos, timestamps, undeniable proof. Lucy had wrapped herself around another man in the dim glow of the hotel bar, her lips brushing against his ear, her hand resting possessively on his thigh. And then, the piece de resistance, the grainy but unmistakable shot of her disappearing into a hotel suite, his hand tangled in her hair. Max exhaled slowly, forcing control over the storm inside him. He could have confronted her last night, could have stormed into that room, shattered the illusion with nothing but his fury. But that wasn't the man he wanted to be. No, he wasn't going to explode. He was going to dismantle her, piece by piece. He glanced at the sleek black envelope resting on the nightstand. The first move in a game she didn't even know she was playing. Lucy thought she had one, that she had him wrapped around her finger. But today, Max would remind her that he was never a man to be played. The evening air was thick with warmth, the kind that clung to bare skin and made everything feel electric. Lucy sat across from Max at their favorite upscale restaurant, her dress a deep shade of crimson, hugging her body in all the ways she knew would draw his eyes. She leaned in slightly, her perfume intoxicating, her lips curling into that effortless smile she had always used to get what she wanted. But tonight, Max wasn't the man she thought she could manipulate. Tonight, he was in control. He swirled his whiskey lazily, watching her with the same intensity he had when they first met. Except this time, his gaze wasn't filled with admiration. It was cold calculation. She had no idea that he had already unraveled her secrets, that beneath the table, his fingers were resting on the black envelope that would change everything. "You're quiet tonight," Lucy purred, running a manicured finger along the rim of her wine glass. "Is something on your mind?" Max smirked, tilting his head. "Just thinking about how much I love surprises," he murmured. Her eyes lit up, mistaking his words for something else. She had no clue that the biggest surprise of all was coming. As the waiter arrived with their entrees, Max slid the envelope across the table. "For you," he said, watching as she picked it up, curiosity flickering across her face. And as she opened it, as realization dawned in her widening eyes, Max saw it, the first crack in the perfect facade she had so carefully built. The soft hum of the city buzzed beyond the penthouse windows, but inside, a different kind of tension filled the air. Lucy stood in the dim glow of the chandelier, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she clutched the black envelope Max had handed her earlier that evening. The edges of the paper crinkled beneath her fingers, her manicured nails digging into it as if she could will away the damning contents inside. Max stood across from her, unbuttoning his cuffs with deliberate ease, his expression unreadable. His suit jacket had already been discarded, leaving him in his crisp white dress shirt, sleeves rolled up just enough to expose the strength of his forearms. He was calm, too calm, and that terrified her. "You look nervous," he finally said, his voice smooth, almost teasing. Lucy swallowed hard, tried to regain control. "Max, whatever you think you know. Save it," he interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. He stepped closer, his cologne wrapping around her like a vice, intoxicating yet suffocating. "I don't need explanations, Lucy. I need honesty. Can you give me that?" She licked her lips, her body betraying her with a subtle tremor. Because despite the power she thought she held over him, despite the years of knowing exactly how to seduce him, Max was different tonight. He wasn't here to be fooled. Then, with deliberate slowness, he reached out, tracing his fingers along the edge of her jaw before leaning in, his breath hot against her ear. "Tell me, sweetheart, was he worth it?" The night air was thick with the scent of rain, the streets glistening under the dim glow of streetlights. Max sat alone at the rooftop bar, a glass of whiskey resting between his fingers, the amber liquid catching the flickering candlelight. The city stretched before him, a vast sprawl of neon and possibility, yet his thoughts were anchored to one person, Lucy. She had tried to play him, tried to weave her lies into something believable, something palatable. But the moment he had watched the video, the grainy hotel security footage where she slipped into another man's embrace, he had known the woman he loved was nothing more than a well-dressed mirage. His fingers tightened around the glass as he exhaled slowly. He had spent years building a life around her, shaping his world to accommodate her every need, and yet, in one reckless moment, she had thrown it all away. But the part that burned the most? She had assumed he would stay, that he would swallow his pride like a good little fool and let her continue living in comfort. A bitter smile ghosted across his lips. Not this time. He pulled his phone from his pocket, scrolling through the documents his lawyer had sent over. The house. No longer hers. The accounts? Frozen. The life she thought she controlled. Over. Lucy had set the fire. But Max would be the one to burn it all to the ground. And for the first time in a long time, he felt free. Lucy's world was unraveling, and for the first time in her life, she was powerless to stop it. The once grand house, the symbol of everything she had taken for granted, stood behind her like a hollowed-out shell. Movers carried boxes past her, indifferent to the silent war raging inside her chest. The same luxurious home where she had once laughed, entertained, and schemed was no longer hers. It had been ripped away as easily as she had toyed with Max's heart. Her hands trembled as she clutched her phone, but every call to him went straight to voicemail. Her texts remained unread. The silence was unbearable. Desperation clawed at her throat as she turned to her family, expecting support. Instead, they had begun their own slow retreat. No longer interested in the fallout of a battle they never expected to lose. Her brother, the same one who had once laughed at Max's devotion, shoved his hands into his pockets and muttered, "You really fucked up, Lucy." A sharp pang of resentment twisted inside her. How could they turn on her now? They had all encouraged her, convinced her she would never lose. But Max, he had shattered every illusion, played a game she never even saw coming. And now, standing on the curb with nothing but regret and the taste of her own failure on her lips, she finally understood Max wasn't coming back. And worse, he didn't care. The hotel lobby buzzed with the quiet hum of conversations, the clinking of glasses, and the muted shuffle of travelers dragging suitcases across polished floors. But for Lucy, the world around her had faded into a blur. She sat at a corner table, her fingers curling around a porcelain coffee cup she hadn't taken a sip from. Her nails tapped against the surface, betraying her nerves as she waited. She had never been this anxious before. Not for a job interview, not for an important deal, not even for the night she decided to betray Max. But now, as she watched the entrance, her heart pounded with something unfamiliar. Then he arrived. Max stepped through the revolving doors, exuding quiet confidence. His tailored suit hugged his broad frame perfectly. His watch gleamed under the chandelier's glow, and his gaze, cold, unreadable, sent a shiver down her spine. Lucy swallowed hard. She had expected anger, hatred, anything but this unnerving detachment. He approached the table, standing instead of sitting, his hands slipping casually into his pockets. "Say what you need to say, Lucy," he said, his voice smooth but devoid of warmth. She licked her lips, searching for the right words, but the weight of the moment crushed her. She had once held power over him, but now, standing before her, Max was untouchable. As she started, but he was already pulling something from his jacket. A thick envelope. He placed it on the table. "Open it," he said, and just like that, her world began to collapse. The street outside the once grand house bustled with movement. A moving truck idled at the curb, its metal ramp clanging under the weight of hurried footsteps. Boxes, some hastily packed, others torn open in frustration, littered the pavement. The remnants of Lucy's once perfect life were now staring at the ground, and her brothers argued over whose fault this truly was. But Lucy? She stood frozen, gripping a single piece of paper, an eviction notice. The house that had once symbolized her victory was no longer hers. The wall she had filled with lies, the foundation she had built on deceit, had crumbled beneath her feet. Across the street, Max leaned against his car, watching the scene unfold with quiet detachment. He had no words left for her, no sympathy to spare. Their eyes met for a fleeting moment, and in that instant, Lucy understood. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about reclaiming dignity, about showing her the weight of her choices. Without a single glance back, Max slid into his car and drove away, leaving Lucy standing in the ruins of her own making.